Where there is light, shadow lurks and fear reigns. Yet by the blade of nights, mankind was given hope.
It's morphin' time!
Special shout out to all our channel members and our Scout Squadron captains in particular: Infinity Wartorn, Don Don Ranger Power, JoJo Star, Jamie's World, Tom Man 2D6 Productions, Infinite 1985, Scrublord Gaming, Toku Texas Cosplay, Aiden Reynosa, Christian Alejandro Saltos Valencia, Smith the Crow, Kyle, MJ Klein, Oma Ender Prime, Spin Dash 54, Psycho O's, Dr. Grid, and Super Shaddix Boom. If you'd like to help support the channel directly, you can find out more details in the join button down below. Hello, this is Soundout here, and on today's video, we're going to be talking about how to watch my favorite Tokusatsu franchise of all time, GARO. GARO is a series that started in 2005 and was kind of done as an offshoot of the normal Tokusatsu styles and formulas. While it still has a lot of the key elements you would expect from something like Kamen Rider or Ultraman, where you have a hero that transforms to fight monsters and protect good and versus evil, it does have a lot of different takes on it because it is produced in a different way. GARO as a franchise is not done by Toei or Tsuburaya, but instead done more independently with a partnership with the Tokushima Film Company, also known as TFC. GARO was created by legendary Tokusatsu director Keita Amamiya, who you may know from directing such films as Zeiram, as well as the Kamen Rider movies of the 90s. He has quite a legacy of reputation working in the industry and eventually creating his own Tokusatsu property in the form of GARO itself. Now, while on this channel we keep things a nice like TV-14 usually, GARO does have a lot of mature themes and a lot of mature content to it, and so because of that, I want to put a preface to it that while GARO is amazing, GARO is not for everybody, because the series itself is a TV mature rating. It has more cases of violence and nudity, both non-sexual and sexual, from the franchise, so it's going to be something that you want to kind of get into if you're older. So if you're younger, you may not be ready for GARO yet. It can get a little intense at times, though it's not one of those like dark and gritty franchises where it's like constantly gore and violence, though some series will play it up more than others depending on who the creative team is. But in general, GARO is kind of like your Tokusatsu that you sort of love and appreciate, but taken just to another level, like just another step up in the terms of maturity, because it is not intended to sell a toy line, it's not intended to market a bunch of merchandise. While merchandise does exist, it's very limited because it is story-driven and production-driven focused first. So before we get into what the premise of GARO is, another thing that runs into trouble is the lack of North American distribution at the moment. A couple years ago, there was like a big effort made and several series were brought over, but currently that's dwindled down to 2 of the 3 anime series, and so because of that, I'm going to mention when it was available or how it was available, but it may not be currently available when you're watching this. Now, what is GARO? GARO is the story of the Makai Knights and the Makai Order and their fight against horrors who prey on humanity. Essentially, there are monsters known as horrors that come from the Makai realm. They are spirits that will possess people that have vices or greed that allows them to be susceptible to darkness. And once that person has been possessed by a horror, they cannot be reverted back to a human. Hence the darker themes. Sometimes you have Toku series, like for Sentai or Kamen Rider, where after, they defeat the monster, everything's back to normal. GARO has a little bit more permanent stakes in that matter. So the conflict arises from the horrors who are being sent from the Makai realm to prey on humanity, and the Nakai Knights and the Makai Priests who are sworn to protect humanity. So the Makai Knights are part of the Makai Order, and they are the primary protectors of people. The Makai Knight armors are passed down from ancient times, and they go through a lineage, sometimes a blood lineage, sometimes through training. But the armor has to choose the wielder, and that's ultimately where a lot of these storylines come in as the path to succession comes clear. There are multiple knights. The main knight, of course, is the Golden Knight GARO. He's the main character in every series, but the Golden Knight GARO is not always the same person in every story, and we will kind of explain that as we go along through the watch guide. There are other knights. There's typically a silver knight in almost every series, and there are other color knights that we will represent and talk about in each of the shows. Now, one of the slight failings of GARO's mythos is that there's never been a woman as a Makai Knight because the armors were crafted for men back in the times like, oh, women can't fight. And so it's kind of like a little bit of a thing that I feel like they should try to work in at some point, because it's pretty much all the knights are all men. Now on the flip side, the Makai priests and priestesses, also known as Makai Hoshi, they are the assistants to the knights. They use magic, they use alchemy sometimes, they use different forms of sciences, and different things where they can actually sometimes defeat horrors on their own if they're low level, but typically need the help from a Makai Knight. And Makai Hoshi can be male or female, and it is a trained vocation as opposed to having to have the armor choose you, and so there is more of them in each series. And what's really cool about that is the fact that even though we don't have female Makai Knights, we have a lot of very prominent Makai priestesses in the series who are to the point of getting their own spin-offs. And that, I think, is what has kind of balanced out sort of the characters in GARO. You typically have in a series a Gold Knight, a Silver Knight, and at least one Makai priestess who holds her own in the series. And that all started back in the first GARO series. And that is where we come down to the basics of the franchise. And that's what I really love about it. It's got the mythology, the fantasy, the way that everything kind of works together. And it's really cool when you watch all the GARO series because they sort of form their own little timeline. But officially speaking, there are multiple timelines for GARO, or at least multiple sections of the timeline. While everything is kind of a evolving, living continuity throughout each production, there is specific ways to group things together, and that's what we're going to do here. So the way this is going to work is that normally you could just watch GARO in release order. Start with the 2005 series and work your way all the way up to the brand new series, The Inheritor of Steel, in 2024. Now that is one way to do it. You can just watch them in release order, and you don't really need this video for that. This video is going to be covering how the series fit in a chronological order. However, what we're going to be doing is grouping them by GARO host, so that way it kind of makes a lot more sense, and we're just going to go production-wise down the timeline. That way, if you want to watch things in a continuity order, that is what this guide is for. Now, where the creators of GARO and TFC have sort of thrown off my plan is the series Makai Retsudan, also known as Makai Tales. This aired in 2016 for the anniversary of GARO, and was a 12-episode anthology series with each episode focusing on a couple different supporting characters from the different GARO series. This also means that not all the episodes take place in order, and they kind of bounce around between two different live-action timelines. So for the purposes of this video, I'm introducing Makai Retsudan, as you could watch it. If you want to just watch Retsudan straight, I'd recommend watching it after you've seen everything from the Saejima family and the Ryuga timelines. However, I'm going to insert the episodes as we go along, so that way you know which episodes go with which timeline, for example. So with all that said, I hope I hooked your interest into GARO, because we're going to go through each timeline and break down what order things go in, what shows are about, and what characters you will see along the journey. So our first continuity family is going to be the Saejima family timeline. You'll see why it's called that in a moment, but this is essentially the original timeline that GARO started in. Beginning October 7, 2005 was GARO, now later known as GARO Chapter the Black Wolf. This was the original GARO series lasting for 25 episodes. This kind of introduced a lot of our core themes: the Golden Knight GARO, in this case Saejima Koga, the Silver Knight Zero, the Makai Priestess Jabi, as well as the Dark Knight Kiba, kind of going with all the similar elements. And a Dark Knight, for those wondering, is a knight who has gone to the darkness. Because as part of the contract that is made to use the armor, the Makai Knights take a risk. Because the armor comes from the Makai realm, which is where the horrors come from, it is imbued with the dark Makai energy. Therefore, the knights can only transform for a limited period of time, typically 99.9 seconds, because otherwise the armor can consume them. And the consequences of something like that is seen in GARO Chapter the Black Wolf. If you're looking for a way to get into GARO, this is absolutely the way to start. It lays out all the base elements that you'll see throughout the franchise, and it gives you a good primer, because it was the first. It's the way that things work. And because the show was made in 2005, as opposed to some other Toku franchises that start in the 60s and 70s, it's really easy to get into. Unfortunately, it's not easy to find online. There was a 2-volume Blu-ray release from Kraken Releasing, which is sadly out of print. And the series was streaming on Sentai Filmworks platform High Dive, but not anymore. You can find the first 2 episodes on GARO's official YouTube channel, but the rest of it you're gonna have to find on your own. And I wish you the best of luck, but I guarantee it's worth looking for. Next up, the Kiba Gaiden. a special released in 2011 focusing on the backstory of Dark Knight Kiba, who was the main villain of the first GARO series. This actually takes place during the series, during episode 23, so I'd recommend watching it after episode 23, or just after the original GARO series. Might as well just finish all the way through 25, but it does take place during episode 23, but it's the setup to the flashback. But this gives backstory on Kiba and what happened to him and how he became a Dark Knight, and it's a good, interesting watch if you're interested in the character. Just like the original GARO, Kiba Gaiden was released on a Blu-ray and was streaming on High Dive, but both are no longer available officially, though you can probably still find the Kiba Gaiden on certain retailers. It is worth checking out if you liked the character. Next up, continuity-wise, is the 2006 two-part special, GARO Byakuya no Maju, The Beast of the Demon Knight. This was a follow-up to the original GARO series shortly after it finished airing, and it features the introduction of White Knight Dan, as well as a resolution of a plot thread that was left hanging at the end of the original GARO series. So I highly recommend checking this out. It's incredibly essential to the future GARO projects in the Saejima timeline. The special was released on a Kraken releasing Blu-ray and was streaming on High Dive, but the Blu-ray is now out of print and it's no longer streaming on High Dive. This is going to sound a little repetitive, but that's just kind of how things are at the moment. Released in 2010 as a restart to the GARO franchise, GARO Red Requiem is the film sequel to the original series. This film sees Koga being introduced to a new Makai priestess in the form of Rekka, who will become very important later on, and introduces several new characters and kind of expands out on the Makai Hoshi side of the universe. Because prior to this, they'd only really had Jabi in the original series, and there wasn't any major developments or explanation as to how the Makai Hoshi really work alongside the Knights. So that, I think, was a good expansion of the world that this movie brought. The movie was released on Blu-ray, but is now out of print. It was streamed on High Dive, but it is no longer. So again, best of luck if you're looking for it. In 2011, the second GARO series, GARO Makai Senki, was released. This series was a true sequel to the original GARO, but also includes elements such as White Knight Dan and Makai Hoshi Rekka from the Byakuya no Maju and Red Requiem movies. So it clearly takes place at this point in the timeline. It also introduces several new characters and has an interesting plot line where it has a bit more of serialization than the first GARO, being more episodic. The series itself lasts for 25 episodes, just like the original, and it really does add to everything that had already been built up from the original GARO projects, and really is where the series started going into a regular release basis, and it's really cool to see how that develops. And the ending of the series will lead into the future projects. Makai Senki was released in 2 Blu-ray volumes, which are now out of print from Kraken Releasing. It was streaming on High Dive, but is no longer. But I highly recommend looking for it. In fact, it's a little bit easier to find than the original GARO series, at least disc-wise. Now, for the rest of the Saejima timeline, none of these have had official North American Blu-ray or streaming releases. In 2013, the film GARO Togen no Fue, also known as the Togen Flute, was released. This film focused on Makai priestesses Jabi and Rekka teaming up to take down a new villain. What's really cool is the fact that there are no Makai Knights in this, and so you have, again, an expansion on the Makai Hoshi, especially after Makai Senki, where they were very important, but specifically Jabi and Rekka, who are 2 of the more popular characters of the franchise, working together in this film. It's really fun, and it's really engaging, and while it's not essential to the GARO timeline, it's really nice to see a focus given to the Makai priestesses. They're not just there as sidekicks, and I think that's really cool. Now, released before Togen no Fue but taking place after is GARO Sokoku no Mairu, the Demon Dragon of the Blue Cries. This sees GARO Saejima Koga travel to the Promised Neverland, a world where rejected things go. This is essentially Keita Amamiya just going, what if I made my own Alice in Wonderland / Land of Oz / let's just throw the Island of Misfit Toys in there. It's kind of bonkers, but it is an important moment in the series itself, especially following up from where Makai Senki left off, and it would kind of establish what could happen that would lead to future GARO installments in this timeline. It's kind of a wacky film, and in the movie, the actor who would later go on to play Kamen Rider Zangetsu plays a scarecrow. So it may be worth checking out just for that. In 2014, Silver Knight Zero got his own spin-off known as Zero Black Blood, lasting for 6 episodes and compiled into 2 compilations known as the White Chapter and the Black Chapter. This was a series that saw Zero encounter a Makai priestess known as Yuna, who inherited her father's Makai armor, but could not use it. It added a whole new layer to the Makai priestesses versus the Makai Knights, and kind of had a lot of discussions about why women couldn't use the Makai armor. It also was good for giving a spotlight to Zero, who had been popular in the original GARO, as well as Makai Senki. The series must have been popular because in 2017, Zero Dragon Blood came out, lasting for 16 episodes. And this time, Zero got to team up with Makai Priestess Rekka. And that was a really cool way of expanding both characters and moving the timeline forward. So now we have some Makai Retsudan episodes to fit in. Like I said, you could just watch the whole Makai Retsudan series after seeing all the Saejima family and Ryuga timelines. But if you want to insert and through your watch, here you go. So at this point in the timeline, episode 1 focusing on Rekka and Shiguto. The first half of episode 3, which focuses on Knight Baron. Episode 5, which focuses on Yuna, Kane, and Makai Knight Lord. The first half of episode 8, which focuses on Shiguto and features Rekka. And episode 11, which features White Knight Dan and Jabi. In 2016, the Garo Ashura special came out, not only for Garo's anniversary, but also for the New Japan World Wrestling collaboration. It features Hiroshi Tanahashi as a Garo of the ancient past, and is mostly made up of New Japan World Wrestling wrestlers as the characters. The story is told in the form of a storybook, where the mother of Saejima Koga's son is telling him a bedtime story. Now, Garo Ashura is a prequel to the 2014 series that predated it, Garo Makai no Hana, also known as Garo the Makai Flower. The series lasted for 25 episodes, and it saw Koga's son, Ryuga, become the new Garo. So the Saejima family timeline, as we've named it, is because there is a passing of the mantle. Koga had received his armor from his father Taiga, as seen in flashbacks in the original Garo, and Ryuga receives the armor from his father Koga. The circumstances for how that happens, I will not tell you. That's spoilers. But Makai no Hana, running for 25 episodes, allowed to expand the characters and the lore. We saw the introductions of characters like Mayuri, who was a companion to Ryuga through the series, a new Makai Knight, not a Silver Knight, but we had Crow, who is quite a cool character and having a different design than most Makai Knights you'd expect. And then we also had a new Makai Priestess in the form of Biku. And Biku was a really cool character to the point where she got her own film in 2015, Biku Darkness Slasher. She was known as the Darkness Slasher in the series, which is just such a cool title. And it was really cool to give her a solo movie. So the rest of the Saejima family timeline episodes for Makai Retsudan take place between Biku and the next project, so let's run them down. The back half of episode 3 focused on Mayuri. Episode 6 focusing on Biku. The back half of episode 8 focused on the knights Crow and Giru. Episode 9 focused on Daichi and Ryuga's Garo. And then episode 12 is a crossover between universes, so you could watch it, probably after the Ryuga timeline, but if you wanted to just slip it in here, this was a crossover with Rekka from this timeline, Rianne from the other timeline, and a special surprise in the form of a Garo. Now in 2019, after 5 years of waiting, a Garo film that was a sequel to Makai no Hana was finally releasing. And to lead up to that movie was the P-Garo Saejima Koga YouTube miniseries. These are 3 shorts to kind of explain how Koga got from where we saw him last to where he would appear next. And in October 2019, Garo Gekko no Tabibito, also known as Garo Under the Moonbow, released in Japanese theaters. This film was the promised film sequel to Garo Makai no Hana, with Ryuga as the lead, but with Garo's Koga and Taiga also in the movie. This works as a Ryuga movie, but it also features the previous 2 Garos in this timeline, uniting 3 generations of Garo together. If you're thinking that poster looks like the Spider-Man No Way Home before that even existed, it's basically how it felt for Garo fans. Now, this film has not received an official English release, but the Japanese Blu-ray does have English subtitles if you're willing to import. This is the end of the Saejima family timeline as of right now, and personally speaking, I feel like this is a perfect fitting finale for it, and I don't feel like we need to revisit this timeline when there's other timelines that could use some additional work. But of course, as I've been talking, there are multiple timelines, so it's time to switch over to the Ryuga timeline. So now let's step into the Ryuga continuity. This can exist in the timeline of the Saejima family because essentially it's sort of set in a near future, and it's kind of nebulous. It's got like future tech sometimes, but it's not like super modern day. You could seemingly place this years after the Saejima family timeline. That's kind of what I do in my personal headcanon, though a lot of sources will just say it's a separate timeline, which is sometimes easier. So take your pick. Let's just call this the time frame of the Ryuga characters. This began in 2013 with Garo Yamayotra Asumono, the one who shines in the darkness. Lasting for 25 episodes, it's introduced a brand new Garo in the form of Dogai Ryuga, who has a tarnished Garo armor. He's not all gold, but he's got partial black armor. He is joined by 2 other Makai Knights, Zen and Guy, who are kind of nice supporting cast. The series itself also introduces the Makai Priestess Rianne. This series is not directly involved with Keita Amamiya. He sort of passed the reins to other production teams while he was working on other Garo projects. So it sort of, it gets a little bit more gory, and it gets a little bit more sexual. Like, there's a lot more sexual nudity here, where the Saejima family timeline is pretty much like there is nudity, but it's non-sexual. This has got sex scenes, so it's a little bit jarring if you're used to the Saejima family timeline, and it pretty much only affects this series of the Ryuga timeline. They kind of drop it after this. The series also decided to go with the method of having motion capture CGI suits for the armors, and that doesn't look as strong as the practical suits that couldn't move much, and then the CG for fast action method that the Saejima family timeline used. And it's something, again, they didn't repeat going forward. So this series sits in kind of a weird bubble. It is a good starting point because it is got less continuity for Ryuga, but they kind of gave you a fresh restart point if you wanted to skip this entirely. And that was in the form of GARO Goldstorm Show the movie in 2015. This was a theatrically released film that works as a pilot for the next series, and this movie boils down the cast to just being Dogai Ryuga's GARO and Makai Priestess Rian. Now, following a couple weeks after that film, Goldstorm Show the series debuted, lasting 23 episodes. This saw Ryuga and Rian go up against the two most iconic villains of the franchise, Jinga and Amiri. These two characters took the world by storm in the world of GARO on both the fan side and the production side, as we will soon see. Jinga, of course, if you haven't recognized him, is Masahiro Inoue, who plays Kamen Rider Decade in Kamen Rider, and that also brought a lot of attention to it. But boy, does he thrive here in a way he never did as Decade. This is what makes the series interesting, because unlike, the conflict between GARO and Kiba in the original series, where Kiba was a fallen Dark Knight, Jinga is a fallen Makai Knight who became a horror, and Amiri is a fallen Makai Priestess. And they're going up against Ryuga and Rian, who are, currently on the light side of being a Makai Knight and a Makai Priestess. It's a great conflict because it puts a mirror to both sets of characters. Ryuga and Rian see what they could become if they're not careful, and Jinga and Amiri see what they used to be. Adding to this, they also added Makai Knight Giga, who has a giant axe for a transformation item, and he is like one of my favorite designs ever. Can you tell I love Goldstorm? But anyways, the conclusion of Goldstorm Makai Retsudan did come out, and that is where we have some Ryuga timeline-specific episodes. First up, episode 2 focuses on Jinga and Amiri, and specifically this is a prequel to the events of Goldstorm, so technically timeline-wise it should happen before Yamio Terasu Mono. However, I put it here because you don't really want to get spoiled on Jinga and Amiri's backstory from this episode when you want to see it in the series, and then it's expanded on here. Episode 4 focuses on Rian and Ryuga. Episode 7 focuses on Haruna and Giga. 10 focuses on Ryume and D. Ringo, who are supporting cast from Goldstorm. And then episode 12 is that aforementioned crossover between Rekka, Rian, and a GARO. So it kind of fits better to watch it here, but if you wanted to watch it with the Saejima stuff, it's still technically Saejima timeline as well. Now, in 2018, a sequel film was released, GARO Kami no Kiba, also known as GARO Fang of God. This saw the return of Jinga, who kind of dominates the movie. It also saw the return of Zen and Guy from Yamio Terasu Mono, and it kind of brought the Ryuga timeline a little bit full circle, except for the fact that Ryuga is kind of the supporting character of the movie. They focus a lot on Jinga because they could tell who was really popular. And this resulted in Kami no Kiba Jinga, Fang of God Jinga, a spin-off series from that movie showing an alternate world where Jinga was a good heroic knight and how that could all fall apart. It's not exactly a prequel, it's not exactly a sequel, it's somewhere in the middle, but it's kind of interesting, though incredibly low budget, I gotta say. Of all the GARO productions, this is the one where I felt, oh wow, they had no money for this one, and that's kind of a shame. Yeah, they kind of got all their Jinga out of their system at this point, because we kind of asked as fans, well boy, Ryuga really didn't get like a nice punchy finale, did he? He kind of got outshadowed by this Jinga guy. And this leads to 2024 with GARO Hagane o Sugumono, which is the Inheritor of Steel. This is a brand new series starting on January 11th, 2024. And as of recording, we don't know what episode count we have, nor do we have a poster even, so it's a little bit under wraps even though I'm filming this about a week before it airs. There is going to be more details about this, but it is the follow-up to the Ryuga timeline, and it does feature the return of Dogai Ryuga and hopefully Rian, but at least Ryuga is back for another series, and I think this is great because it kind of felt like he got a little outshined in the last few projects by Jinga. So that concludes the Ryuga part of the timeline. But now we gotta jump to one other live-action GARO production that doesn't really fit anywhere. Airing in 2020 for the GARO 15th anniversary, GARO vs. Road lasted 12 episodes. This series was a battle royale, fight to the death. Whoever wins the competition wins the armor of GARO, and there are sinister forces working behind it. I can't fit this in any specific timeline, because for a GARO armor to be up for grabs in a tournament-style setting, in a battle royale, just doesn't seem to fit the rest of the established lore, especially with the fact the armor chooses the wearer, not somebody winning a competition. So this could just be considered as like an offshoot. This is a series that was definitely more violent than other GARO series because you didn't have Makai priests and Makai knights fighting horrors. You had average people trying to survive, from fighting horrors to fighting each other. If you like that sort of thing, you'll probably enjoy this series, but it is kind of this weird offshoot that I can't really place anywhere else. So now we've come to the thing that a lot of people may recognize GARO from, the world of anime. Yes, in 2014, GARO Hono no Kokuin, also known as GARO the Animation or GARO the Carved Seal of Flames, was an anime production for GARO, and this is like one of the coolest things they did. Because unlike some other anime adaptations of Tokusatsu that have come to exist, this decided to go in a completely different direction. Set themselves in a fictional country and do a giant commentary piece on the Spanish Inquisition. I love GARO. This series saw GARO as Leon, who was reluctant to take up the armor, as well as some other characters I can't talk about without being spoilers. It takes a lot of inspiration from the country of Spain, even though it doesn't technically take place in Spain. It takes a lot of things from the Spanish Inquisition, but it's not really a Spanish Inquisition. There is a witch hunt, but the witches are the Makai priestesses, and the series kicks off in a really explosive fashion in a way I've never seen a show before. Now, because it is an anime, there is a lot more blood because they can kind of get away with a little bit more in animation, and there is some more sexual scenes because Leon's father is quite the sexual deviant. But it's nothing too explicit. It's not like a hard R sort of situation, but it is a little bit more mature than maybe the live action stuff because they got the animation thing going on. Now, this series did run for 24 episodes and was released on 2 volumes of Blu-ray in North America by Funimation. There also was a complete set, which I highly recommend getting over these volumes because these volumes are way too expensive, and as far as I know, it's still in print. For some reason, though, this series is no longer streaming on Crunchyroll, at least in the US. There was a bonus episode released with the Japanese Blu-ray known as Home. It's technically episode 25. However, that was never on Crunchyroll, and it is on the Blu-rays at least. But that is kind of a little epilogue episode. It's not super necessary, but it adds on to character work. In 2016, the series received a sequel, GARO Divine Flame, which I can't talk about much because otherwise, spoilers for how Hono no Kokuin turns out. There's a lot of twists and turns from the beginning of that show to the end, but there was a sequel film that was released on Blu-ray by Funimation. I don't think it was ever on streaming, but I'm not exactly sure on that, but it is available and still in print. And this film does work as a true sequel, following up on several characters and events from the series. Now, in 2015, another GARO anime came out, GARO Gurren no Suki, also known as GARO Crimson Moon, set in Japan's Heian period, not a fictional Japan, but like, supposed to be actual Japan, and features a lot of real-world people cast in these parts, which is kind of really cool. Now, this series features a new GARO in the form of Raiko. However, the main character is the Makai priestess Seimei. She is actually the primary character of the series and the one the plot revolves around. And that's what I think is really cool, is that they kind of made a Makai priestess the main character. But of course, GARO is a prominent focus of the series as well, and there is a Silver Knight that appears later in the series. This show has a lot of great style, and for some reason, even though the previous show is based on Spain and the Spanish Inquisition, this is the show that has Spanish guitar in its soundtrack. Try to figure that one out. This lasted for 23 episodes, was released on a 2-volume Blu-ray, though once again I recommend the complete set, and it is streaming on Crunchyroll still for the first 23 episodes. There was a 24th episode, The Butterfly of Time, added as a bonus for the Japanese Blu-ray and is on the North American Blu-ray, but not on streaming, and that focused on a character-specific story that was an epilogue to the series, much like they'd done for the first anime. In 2018, a sequel film, Uzutsumi Sakura GARO, also known as The Fleeting Cherry Blossom GARO, was released. Now, unlike the series, which should get licensed, this hasn't been licensed for North American release, so good luck finding it online, but it is a sequel to Gurren no Suki, following up on its characters and storylines. And the third and currently last GARO anime series is 2017's GARO Vanishing Line. This lasted for 24 episodes and takes place in a near-future modern United States of America setting, including New York City and there's a desert arc where they travel cross country. It's literally takes place in America. It's the American GARO. And because of that, it's got a lot of things that I think they intentionally wanted to ramp up kind of the American movie tropes. You have a huge muscular GARO in the form of sword. You have a Makai priestess who uses magic-infused technology. This is a series that has style, action, and flair, and caught everybody off guard and hit them like a semi-truck because they didn't announce it as a GARO show. It was just, oh yeah, we're doing this new anime thing called Vanishing Line. Ignore the main character's belt buckle looking like GARO. And then later on, they're like, it's a GARO, and everyone was like, what? This series is bombastic, it's exciting, and I actually recommend it as a starting point if you're an American fan that's trying to get into Japanese media. It's going to have some things that you'll recognize from kind of American movie tropes, which I think is kind of a fun way to introduce it. The series was released on Blu-ray in 2 volumes and also this complete set. Again, recommend the complete set for pricing by Funimation, and it is still streaming on Crunchyroll. And the coolest part about the 3 GARO animes is that you have one that takes place in fictional Spanish Inquisition, one in Japan's Heian period, and one in the near future in America. That means that they all slot into the GARO timeline. So you could seemingly put together a timeline where you go from Raiko's GARO series, Gurren no Suki, to Leon's GARO series, Hono no Kokuin, to the original Saejima family timeline, to the Ryuga timeline, to Vanishing Line, and then just watch Versus Road for fun. And that's what's really cool about GARO is while technically these things are a little bit independent, they actually kind of work all together when you've seen all of it. And I hope this guide has been helpful for that. GARO is my favorite Tokusatsu franchise of all time. I love the lore, I love the character building, I love the focus on the production aspect as opposed to the toy commercial. I still love the toy commercial. Obviously, I love toys. But it's really cool to see something like Toku, which is always tied to the toy commercial to meet its production budgets, get to do something truly creative. Not all GARO series are great, not all movies are made equal. However, I think that they're all really exciting to see what they try to attempt with each production. And I'm always excited when something new from GARO comes out. And it has been 4 long years since Versus Road for The Inheritor of Steel to come out, and I can't wait to see what happens in that series. I really, really recommend GARO if you're somebody that's grown up on Tokusatsu, that is old enough to enjoy and experience GARO. You will find a breath of fresh air in your Tokusatsu watching experience to kind of break out of the big 3 shows and go check out something different. It works for me every time. Every time I feel a little burned out on Rider or Sentai or Ultraman, I go watch some GARO, and then my spark and excitement for Tokusatsu ignites yet again. And that is what I love about this series. So that does it for this viewing guide. Check out the other viewing guides on this channel. We have done plenty. There are more to come. People keep asking, when is the Super Sentai viewing guide? It will be coming with the premiere of the next Super Sentai series, much like how I tied this to the timing of the new GARO series. So I hope you stay tuned and hit subscribe and the notification bell so you don't miss out on the video. Please hit the like button. It tells YouTube that you enjoyed the video and to send it to more people so more people can get into GARO. We are a small fandom, but we are mighty. Leave a comment down below. Tell me what your favorite GARO series is, or tell me if this piqued your interest into watching GARO, or if you have any questions about timeline things. I know it can get a little confusing because we're like running the continuity order versus the production order. So let me know if you have any questions down below. If you'd like to follow up any questions, we have a Discord server in the link below. There are several fans of GARO in there, so we have a community of knowledge. You can check out my Monday live streams here on this YouTube channel at 5 p.m. Eastern, where we discuss GARO, Toku, all kinds of cool stuff. If you'd like to help support the channel directly, please consider joining as a channel member for as low as $1 a month. There are cool perks in there, such as early access to videos, and it helps support the channel so I can continue to do things like these viewing guides. You can find me on social media if you like at Soundout12. You can also find my awesome graphic designer on social media and Discord at DarkClaw643. And you can find Hero Club at hero-club.com for Tokusatsu news, interviews, and more. And until next time, this is Soundout saying goodbye.